Today is October 8th, 2022. I want to talk about the situation in and around Ukraine. I'm going to touch on the attack on the Crimean Bridge. But first, before I do that, let's, as always, let's take a look at the map. This is liveuamap.com. It is a pro-Ukrainian map, and I show the pro-Ukrainian map because I'm giving Ukraine benefit of the doubt, and I'm going to show you how still this does not look good for Ukraine. If we look at the map, we're looking at two, potentially three fronts. They launched their first and largest offensive around Kherson, and the front lines have stabilized for the time being. You can see this light grayish blue color right here. Russia had been holding all the way up to this point. So this is one area where Ukraine's push has made significant territorial gains, but this has come at the cost of extremely heavy losses. Conversely, Russia, instead of fighting to the last man to hold this territory, they simply withdraw. This doesn't mean that they're not taking any casualties or losing any equipment at all. It just means they're losing much less than Ukraine is. And in the long term, this is going to play to Russia's advantage, not Ukraine. And I will talk about that more here in just a moment. If we go to where the other offensive had been going on and is kind of in stasis right now, the Kharkov offensive, which is now trying to push into the northern Donbas region. You can see no major gains have been made over the last day or two since my last update. But that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be more serious fighting. Ukraine is scraping together as many forces as possible to try to continue pushing inward, and Russia is busy preparing defenses to stop them. What is going on reported, unless you're following the Duran, and I highly recommend that you do, there is fighting and Russian advances in the city of Bakhmut. Bakhmut is a key section of Ukrainian defenses in the Donbas region. They had several lines of serious defenses built up over the course of 7 to 8 years. We're talking about trenches, concrete fortifications, places where they had positioned tanks, everything that you could imagine. They had these defenses layered, they were overlapping, they were extremely formidable, and Russia has been incrementally, methodically destroying them and pushing through them. And this is one of the last lines that Ukraine has, and Bakhmut is right at the center of this last line. So it will be a very significant breakthrough strategically for Russia. If they get through here, there's a lot that they can build upon that, especially with the mobilization on its way. That's something to keep in mind. Now let's zoom out. We're looking at Ukrainian offensives around Kherson and Kharkov, northern Donbas. Well, there's another one that we keep hearing about, both from Ukrainian and pro-Russian sources. One from Zaporosia, pushing toward Melitopol. And the point of this is to cut the land bridge from Crimea to the rest of Russia. Remember, all of these regions now, Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, Lugansk, this is all officially recognized by Russia as part of Russia. Whether anyone else recognizes it or not doesn't matter. Russia recognizes it as Russian territory. What Ukraine is trying to do is cut Crimea off from the rest of Russia. That's what that is meant to do, and has not been launched yet. There appear to be obvious preparations. Everyone is just holding their breath, waiting for the offensive to begin. And then we had this attack, and it clearly is an attack. It remains to be seen exactly how it was carried out. Some sources are saying a truck bomb. There is footage available of the explosion. It's hard to tell if the truck created the explosion or was just in the wrong place at the wrong time when the explosion went off. I think we should wait and see what the investigation reveals, but it was almost certainly an attack. Ukraine has been talking about destroying the Crimea Bridge since it was built, and especially from February onward, this is all they've talked about, is blowing up the Crimean Bridge. Now, destroying the Crimean Bridge, now think about this. You cut off the land bridge between Kherson and Crimea and the rest of Russia, but what difference does that make? Is it really fully severed if you still have the Crimean Bridge delivering supplies, additional troops? There's a rail line going across the bridge as well. Have you truly severed these two regions if that bridge is still standing? And the answer is no. So the timing of this attack and the fact that everyone is waiting for the Zaporosia front to see action, I think that says a lot. I think they're definitely connected, and it's just a matter of time now, imminent. The launching of the offensive in the Zaporizhzhia region towards Melitopol. Let's see what the Western media is saying about this. As you could imagine, they are enthusiastically endorsing what is essentially a terrorist attack. I did see a civilian, at least one civilian vehicle engulfed in the explosion. It's hard to believe that there were no casualties. This is from The Guardian. Key bridge linking Crimea to Russia hit by huge explosion. And the article says the Kerch Bridge from Russia to Crimea, a hated symbol of the Kremlin's occupation of the southern Ukrainian peninsula, has been hit by a massive explosion on the span that carries railway traffic. Well, I don't know about that. It looks like the explosion hit the actual roadway, and the explosion ignited fuel tankers on the rail. That's what it looks like happened. What is The Guardian doing here with this very first paragraph in their article? It is charged with political spin. They're enthusiastically praising the attack, although they're not going to openly say that, but clearly the wording. And hated symbol of the Kremlin's occupation of the southern Ukrainian peninsula. Well, they're only reporting from one side of this entire conflict, which is why it's propaganda. And I want to get into that a little bit, because you're going to hear that. You're going to hear people saying it was an illegal bridge. Crimea is occupied by Russia. It's not really part of Russia. But I want to show you this. This is USAID and the International Republican Institute. These are U.S. government-funded organizations. Their entire purpose for existing is to meddle in other countries' internal political affairs in violation of international law. They also do polls, and often they're looking for results to exploit politically, but they also do actual research to see what the dynamics are in a given region, to inform their strategy of finding divides, exploiting them to divide and destroy a targeted country. So this is Public Opinion Survey, residents of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. And this is in 2013. Notice what they're calling it, Autonomous Republic of Crimea. When it was part of Ukraine, it had a special status. It was not just a regular oblast, part of the rest of Ukraine. Even under whatever used to be considered Ukraine, it had a special status. People even then realized that this is not really truly a part of Ukraine. Circumstances of history have made it part of Ukraine, but we recognize very obvious exceptions to this, and it's reflected in the fact that it was an autonomous republic. It had its own independent parliament. It had its own prime minister. And if you go through this poll, you can read the methodology, which is very important, and you can look through all of these different metrics that they are looking at. But the one I want to focus on especially is, regardless of your passport, what do you consider yourself? And this dark blue, that is people considering themselves Russian. So it's obvious that all along, the majority of the people living in Crimea saw themselves as Russians. They saw themselves as Russians. Circumstances of history have left them in this gray area, this autonomous region of Ukraine, when they should have just remained part of Russia. In 2014, when the US government illegally and overtly overthrew the elected government of Ukraine and installed an anti-Russian client regime bolstered by Nazi militias, The people in Crimea obviously wanted no part of that. They saw what was going on, and they themselves requested Russian forces to come and protect Crimea while they organized a referendum and officially joined the Russian Federation. That is what happened. So this is an article from Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. This is also funded by the US government. And the title of the article is Parliament OKs Putin's Request to Use Russian Forces in Ukraine. And the article says, earlier on March 1st, the Ukrainian defense minister said Russia had sent 6,000 additional troops into Crimea, along with 30 armored personnel carriers since February 28th. He said the step had been taken without Ukrainian permission and in violation of Ukraine's territorial integrity. The Russian move comes after Putin's office said Moscow will not ignore a March 1st request for peacekeeping support made by Sergei Aksyonov, the pro-Russian prime minister of Ukraine's Crimea region. And later on in the article, this US government-funded media outlet is going to admit that Crimea had their own parliament. They appointed this prime minister of Crimea, and together they requested Russian help and support and protection so that they could organize a referendum, correct this circumstance of history, rejoin the Russian Federation. And from 2014 onward, since they became part of the Russian Federation, they have been spared the worst of conflict that would unfold in Ukraine. And it wasn't just violence in the east, in the Donbas region from 2014 onward. It was violence across the entire country. The Nazis, the Nazi militias who were buttressing the regime in Kiev, they carried out violence across the entire country. They were fighting Ukrainian forces in the west. Anyone who got in their way politically, they would use violence again. So there was terror and violence across the entire country of Ukraine. Crimea was spared it because they joined the Russian Federation. It is only recently that they have started to see violence as part of this conflict spilling over into Crimea. It's very obvious that the best interests of the people in Crimea were served by rejoining the Russian Federation and avoiding all of the violence and chaos that unfolded from 2014 onward, when the US government illegally overthrew the elected government of Ukraine and installed a client regime in its place. That much should be obvious to everyone. Now, what about Crimea? The bridge has been attacked, has been damaged to the extent of which I don't know as of recording this. If I get a conclusive answer, I will pin it in the comment section, in the comment section below the video. But look at this map. This red, this is the bridge, the Crimean bridge from Russia to Crimea. And let's just say it's partially obstructed because of the damage, or even fully obstructed. Before they built this bridge, they had a ferry crossing right here. They have rail infrastructure and roads leading up to the terminals, and they are able to move people and supplies across here. And they are already talking about putting this back into use. How quickly they can do that, I don't know. But this is an alternative, an obvious alternative. It was how they were moving things to Crimea before the bridge was built. The bridge will obviously, they will try to repair it. Again, this is something that can't happen overnight. This will disrupt supplies from Russia to Crimea. Without a doubt, it's going to disrupt it. Will it be a big enough disruption to make any difference for Ukraine and its offensive? That remains to be seen. I don't think that it will ultimately. But Ukraine would prefer to have this disruption on whatever level it is impacting in the background of the next phase of their offensive. That is not ideal for them, but better than if there was no disruption at all. So this is why they have done it. And I am almost certain they did this because they're timing it in coordination with the third offensive they plan on launching in the Zaporosia region. So there's two ongoing offensives, Ukrainian offensives. A third one appears almost certainly about to begin. I have talked about in many videos the heavy losses Ukraine is suffering, because the nature of the fighting throughout this entire conflict since it began in late February has been Russian long-range fires against Ukrainians who enjoy numerical advantage but lack the long-range fires to advance on Russian positions without losing huge amounts of men and equipment. You can see videos of Ukrainian armored vehicles and even civilian vehicles just rushing toward defenses. And they're trying to overwhelm the defenses. They're trying to send more men and vehicles into the defenses than Russia can destroy. And then once whatever remains of that attacking force reaches Russian lines, they either figure they can fight at close quarters, negating long-range fires of Russian forces, or they could force Russia back. What Russia has decided to do consistently since this all began was, once their forces are in danger of being encircled, or once it appears that they might start suffering heavy losses, they pull them back. They pull them back, and as they do so, they are inflicting heavy losses on Ukrainian forces. When Ukraine loses trained manpower and vehicles, tanks, and other armored vehicles, is very difficult, if not impossible at this point, to replace it in any timely manner. Tanks especially. They have whatever tanks they are ever going to have, and the only other option now for Ukraine is to receive Western main battle tanks, which, as I've said many times before, is impractical and is not going to happen anytime soon. This fact is so obvious that even the most fanatical supporters of Ukraine are pointing this out. People that are at least trying to be honest about certain things. I want to show you this. This is Jullian Ropcke. I don't think I'm saying his last name correctly, but he is a staff at the German Bild. It's a newspaper in Germany. He is a fanatical voice of support for Ukraine. He has been throughout this entire conflict. And to give you just a little taste of how fanatical this support is and how unjournalistic his tone is, this is what he says about the attack on the Crimean Bridge. He says, "The end of the illegally built Crimean Bridge just 4 years after it was inaugurated by dictator Putin." So he's no friend of Russia, and he supports Russia in no shape, form, or way. With that in mind, look at what he says here. This is very important. Look at what he's saying. He says, "I see and understand the joy of Kherson getting liberated faster than the Ukrainian army can follow the fleeing Russian troops." Are they just fleeing in disarray, or is this very deliberate to preserve their fighting capacity while exhausting Ukrainians? Just keep that in mind. But let me remind you that Putin's hordes. So, I mean, again, is this a journalist, or is this someone who has clearly picked a side and, as a journalist, is deliberately trying to dehumanize the other side? Putin's hordes withdraw with 90% of their weapons and almost zero casualties. So the threat for the South is far from over. So this fanatical pro-Ukrainian German journalist is saying the exact same thing that I'm saying. It is impossible to look at what's going on and not see that this is what's happening. No matter how much territory Ukraine gets, they are losing men and equipment they cannot replace. They have no way of replacing it. And just a matter of physics, they are overextending their army physically. It is being overextended, it is being stretched out, and it's being thinned out in the process. When it reaches the maximum extent that it can push, and it has suffered all of the losses they will in the process of doing so, Russian forces are still going to be there in this basically the same number and with the same amount of equipment as before, along with 300,000 additional troops and associated equipment. This is clear as day. And even people like Julian here from the Bild, a fanatical pro-Ukrainian voice, even he sees this and admits this. And I put the link to the tweet in the video description below, and you can click on it and you can see the hysterical responses from other pro-Ukrainian voices out there who I think know in the back of their mind he's absolutely right, but they don't want to admit that that is the fact, that this is not the beginning of a sustainable offensive, the beginning of Ukraine. I mean, what do they imagine is going to happen? Ukraine conquering Russia? It isn't. It is an all-out, last-ditch offensive. They're throwing everything they have at Russian forces. What is the goal of this? If they cannot militarily defeat Russia because all of Russia's forces are still intact, what is the purpose of doing this? What is the purpose of hitting the Crimean Bridge, temporarily disrupting the flow of supplies to Crimea and from Crimea to Russia? What is the point of all of this? It's to maximize the psychological and political impact on Russian forces in the field and the Russian government's support both in Russia and in allied countries. That is what this is all about. And they hope, Ukraine and its Western sponsors, that they can create enough hysteria, enough anger, enough frustration to maybe create some sort of anti-government movement or staging some sort of coup to overthrow the Russian leadership and, I think in their minds, bring the whole conflict to an end. And you will see them comparing now with Russia in 1917. But Alexander Micuris of the Duran, if you are following his videos, and you should be, along with Alex Christoforou, both of them are doing excellent coverage, especially now at this juncture, where I think hysteria has overtaken a lot of other voices out there. Alexander Micuris talks about the political atmosphere in Russia. The public still overwhelmingly supports Russian President Vladimir Putin. They also overwhelmingly support not only the special military operation, but the associated mobilization, partial mobilization. They support this, and it isn't an issue of get rid of the leadership and end the war. It's a matter of, why isn't the leadership being more aggressive? Why aren't they throwing more into this conflict? Why aren't they winning? That is the sentiment in Russia right now. The West is doing everything that it can to create some sort of political upheaval, but the problem is the atmosphere in Russia is not one in which that political upheaval will bring Ukraine some sort of reprieve. Exactly the opposite. It'll only escalate it further. I don't sit in on the Russian General Staff's meetings. I don't have fun conversations with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. So I don't know what they're thinking. I don't know what they're talking about. I don't know ultimately what they're planning. All I can do is look at the information available to me and everyone else at this time and try to draw the most logical conclusions from it. So that is, according to the information I have available to me at this time, how I see things unfolding. I see Russia fully aware of how bad this all looks, but also aware of how desperate the situation will be for Ukraine very shortly as they overextend themselves, expose themselves, and deplete themselves while carrying out these offensives that Russian forces have clearly, from the beginning, deliberately made the decision not to lose their own forces and equipment fighting Ukraine. That does not mean Russia isn't losing any troops or any equipment. You will see on social media examples of Russian equipment that has been captured, examples of Russian soldiers who have perished in the fighting. But if you're looking at both sides, you can see how lopsided it is, to the point where even the Washington Post and the New York Times, especially in regards to the offensive around Kherson, how lopsided the fighting is in favor of Russia. They may be losing territory, but Ukraine is losing absolutely everything else. And at the end of the day, that's what matters. If you have taken all the territory, but your army has disappeared in the process, and the enemy still has their army, who's going to ultimately win? It will be he who still has his army, which will be Russia. We'll keep a close eye on this. Keep an eye on the comment section. Pinned at the top of the comment section, I will have any crucial updates regarding the Crimean Bridge that I can confirm and verify. I may even change it over time until I do my next update. Until then, if you thought this was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, to my Rumble or Odyssey channel, depending on where you see this video published. If you're watching this on YouTube, check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. I just mentioned Rumble and Odyssey, where all of my YouTube videos are automatically backed up on. I also am very active on Telegram. This is an alternative to Facebook and Twitter. I've been kicked off of both, so I use Telegram, and I update that several times a day. So when I see verifiable information about the Crimean Bridge, I'm going to post it there as well. If you're following me there, you will see updates several times a day, in addition to the around 3 videos a week I publish. Also in the video description below will be the links to all of these articles, Twitter posts, everything that I went over in the video. There will also be ways in the video description below where you can help support my work. I do not monetize my YouTube channel, so if you see an ad pop up, feel free to skip it. It's not doing me any good at all. If you want to support my work, you can do that through Buy Me a Coffee, through Patreon, and through PayPal. To everyone who has been helping out, whether it's month-to-month donations, one-time donations, or even if you're just sharing this work with others, helping get the word out, I greatly appreciate that. I could not do this work without that support. So thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.